Hello everyone and welcome to News 21. What you are about to watch is living proof that politics is indeed a dirty game. It's been over 10 years since Africa's greatest leader, Colonel Mohammed Gaddafi, was brutally murdered by NATO. The man's leadership was so controversial that it made the line between truth and lies even thinner. For some, he was a hero, a man who took Libya from nothing to becoming the best nation on earth in terms of living standards, while for others, he was a brutal dictator, who murdered anyone that challenged his authority. Whether you loved or hated him, the man was just human and had his flaws. However, his achievements not only in Libya but in Africa as a whole speak volumes about who he truly was. If you love Gaddafi and the things he fought for, then please give this video a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe as a way of supporting us. Colonel Mohammed Gaddafi came into power in 1969 through a military coup and dedicated the rest of his life trying to give not only Libyans but the entire continent a better life. In doing so, he went on a quest to unify and develop the entire African continent. Gaddafi started by convincing African leaders to form what is today known as the African Union, aimed to unify all African states and eliminate every form of neocolonialism. Being at the head of this union, he proposed that Africa develops a unified currency backed by gold, which was to be stronger than the US dollar and give Africa monetary power. He later on planned on forming a joint African military, similar to NATO, something which would have saved him had he succeeded in forming it earlier. Years later, he proposed the creation of a replica of the World Bank in Africa, which was going to stop the continent from borrowing at exorbitant interest rates from the World Bank or IMF. All these ideas of his, plus his aggression towards the West, made him become a threat to nations like America, Britain and France, considering how much they all benefit from Africa. Gaddafi's ambitions gave them every reason to want him out. First, they tagged him as a brutal dictator who had held his people captive, then used their Western media to spread this false image just so they could get a valid reason to invade Libya. For the records, anytime a Western nation claims a leader is a dictator, just know for sure they found some rich mineral which they want at all cost, but that leader is standing in their way. Same thing they did with Robert Mugabe, Saddam Hussein, and Thomas Sankara, just to name a few. Need I remind you that during Gaddafi's reign, Libyans enjoyed free education, free electricity, free healthcare, free housing, a $50,000 allowance for newlyweds to kick off life with, and a $5,000 allowance to newborn babies to permit their mothers cater for them. Just pause for a second and try to process all that. Even America, which claims to be the greatest country on earth, doesn't have such social benefits. Libyans had the highest literacy rates in Africa, but somehow, they accepted Western media propaganda and ended up killing the man who gave them everything, which became the nation's worst mistake. Gaddafi's greatest achievement was perhaps his contribution towards the construction of Africa's telecommunications satellite at a time when Africans were completely disconnected from the rest of the world. Back then, the entire continent paid an annual $500 million for Western satellite services, so he came up with the idea of building Africa's own. The cost was estimated at $400 million, but due to difficulties in raising the funds, Gaddafi chipped in a whopping $300 million to support the project, while the rest was contributed by other African states. Thanks to him, businesses, families, and friends can now communicate affordably within and outside Africa. His ambitions and successes in Africa made him gain so much popularity that many started seeing his plans of forming a United States of Africa becoming a reality. This meant that all African leaders would have to relinquish their power and authority to be under one unified president. Something which most didn't see themselves doing, so overnight, he became a threat to the power grip of some African leaders, and when they had the opportunity, they didn't hesitate to stab him in the back. This brings me to answer the question of who betrayed Gaddafi. For a man who fought and contributed so much for the African continent, it was quite a shame that when he was being hunted down by NATO, African leaders watched powerlessly and no one, except for Robert Mugabe, uttered a word. WikiLeaks later revealed how some of these African leaders were bribed to keep their mouths shut while their puppet masters had their way. They sold out Gaddafi for a few extra dollars and euro accounts, while the African people, especially Libyans, pay the price. In a more specific sense, one man in Africa played a greater role in betraying Gaddafi than any other. This was no one else but the 35-year-serving Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni, who is fond of accusing opposition challenger Bobi Wine of being a Western tool, yet WikiLeaks showed how his closeness to the US made him betray his longtime friend. Relations between Gaddafi and Museveni started far back in 1980 during the Ugandan Civil War. In 1982, when Museveni and his troops ran out of money and ammunition, Gaddafi stepped in and offered his help by airdropping weapons under Museveni's rebel-controlled regions. This gave Museveni the much-needed resources to win his military coup, and in 1986 he became president of Uganda. Gaddafi's army proceeded to train Museveni's military, invested billions of dollars into the Ugandan economy, and even financed Museveni's subsequent elections. To the Muslim community in Uganda, Gaddafi became a hero after he built the biggest mosque in the country for the Muslim faithfuls. He made countless trips to Uganda, and with every new arrival, his popularity grew. For a moment, it felt like a love story until Museveni started feeling threatened because of the extent to which Gaddafi had become popular in Uganda. It became clear to Museveni that if nothing was done to stop Gaddafi, then his plans of uniting Africa will definitely come true, and Gaddafi could easily oust him from power. The man who had helped Museveni get into power, and invested billions in his country, suddenly became a force to be reckoned with. So during one of his secret meetings in the US, he told the then US Secretary of State John D. Fraser that Gaddafi had become a problem in Africa because he wanted to unite the continent under one president and had bribed 45 African head of states to stand by his plans. To weaken Gaddafi, Museveni convinced him that US President Bush had promised to remove sanctions from Libya if Gaddafi destroyed his weapons of mass destruction. Gaddafi went on to destroy them, only to later find out from British intelligence that Museveni had sold him a lie. This became his worst mistake because those weapons had served as a great deterrent to his enemies. The WikiLeaks document also showed how Museveni had become a CIA agent, placed to provide intelligence on other African leaders. He equally told America that the best way to undermine Mugabe was to attack his country's economic performance. Years later, Zimbabwe got hit by economic sanctions of all kinds, and the nation's economy fell into serious inflation. To this day, Zimbabwe hasn't recovered from the effects of those sanctions even after the death of Mugabe. Back in Uganda, Museveni knew that Gaddafi will launch an act of revenge against him and feared that Libya could bomb his plane when flying across international waters, so he asked the US to provide him with additional air radar information. This forced him to replace his Gulfstream 4 jet with a new luxury Gulfstream 5 jet at a cost of $48 million, fitted with enhanced anti-terror capabilities. With international attention switching from Libya to the horrors committed in Syria by the Assad regime, Bashar al-Assad, Gaddafi's longtime friend agreed to cut a deal with the French to provide intelligence on Gaddafi's movements in Libya in exchange for lesser Western pressure on him. This became the biggest betrayal of one Middle Eastern strongman by another. When Gaddafi made a call to Palestinian friends Youssef Shaki and Ahmed Jibril in Syria, Assad obtained his satellite number and handed it over to the French, who tracked his location, enabling NATO to bomb his convoy. It was after that bombing that rebels finally captured Gaddafi in a tunnel, killing and executed him. Just because Gaddafi wanted a better life for his people, he became a threat to Western interest, betrayed by his African brothers and Middle East allies for their selfish political interests. 10 years after his death, Libya has known no peace. It has become a fertile ground for slave trade where sub-Saharans are being sold in markets like animals. Western nations have fueled separatist fightings in Libya while busy drilling the country's oil in the background. Today, the people that sold Gaddafi like Museveni are pretending to preach to the world how much of a great leader he was, and how better the world was with him around. Gaddafi has become a hero in Africa, and his legacy, especially in the world of telecommunication, lives on. While visiting any African country, whenever you make a cheap phone call or use high-speed internet, remember that it's thanks to Gaddafi that you've got that technology. Thanks for watching, and please share to let the world know the truth about Gaddafi and who betrayed him.